They were just two teenage girls boarding a flight, bright-eyed, beautifully dressed, and excited for a trip they'd waited weeks to take. But 5 minutes later, everything changed. Why were Celeste and Amara Monroe, daughters of a powerful airline CEO, denied their seats in first class? Why did a routine flight turn into a national scandal that would ground an entire airline? And more importantly, how did one father's choice spark a movement far beyond the runway? This isn't just a story about race. It's a story about dignity, about a quiet kind of strength, about what happens when calm becomes power and silence becomes change. Through heartbreak, confrontation, and raw truth, this story will challenge everything you think you know about justice at 30,000 feet. So buckle up, because what happened next didn't just shake an airplane. It shook an entire industry. If you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, let's begin. The cabin lights glowed soft amber as passengers filed onto Solis Air Flight 217, bound for San Diego. The gentle hum of engines, the polite shuffle of carry-ons, and the occasional beep from scanning devices made up the background music of yet another coast-to-coast journey. In Seat 11A, Celeste Monroe sat with her legs crossed, her backpack nestled neatly under the seat in front of her. She adjusted the cuff of her pale blue sweater, then checked the time on her watch for the third time in 2 minutes. Her twin sister, Amara, had just dropped into the adjacent window seat, earbuds still in from the terminal playlist she'd been vibing to all morning. "You good?" Amara asked, pulling one bud out and leaning toward her. Celeste gave a small smile. "Yeah, just a little nervous. Not about the flight, about everything going to plan." Amara grinned. "We've got this. We bought the tickets ourselves, checked in ourselves, got the seats we wanted, and we're surprising Mom. It's perfect." Celeste exhaled. Let's hope so. They weren't ordinary teenagers. At 17, they carried themselves with the self-awareness of young women who had seen enough of the world to understand how it worked and enough privilege to assume, up until recently, that if you did everything right, you were safe. But this trip wasn't about privilege. It was about proving something. Their father, Nathaniel Monroe, had spent most of their lives protecting them from real dangers, imagined threats, and often from the world itself. As the CEO of Solis Air Group, one of the largest airline conglomerates in North America, he had the resources to wrap his daughters in comfort, security, and discretion, private terminals, charter flights, security details. But Celeste and Amara had made a pact this time. No private jets, no special favors, no dad calls the airline moments. Just two teenage girls traveling cross-country to surprise their mom, Layla Monroe, who was recovering from her final chemo session in San Diego. That was the plan. A simple, beautiful surprise. They had pooled money from tutoring jobs, saved their allowances, and coordinated everything themselves, including a signed parental consent form from Nathaniel, which he had given reluctantly, believing it was for a school debate trip. Now, they sat quietly in premium economy, row 11 seats A and B, just ahead of the main cabin bulkhead. To most passengers, they looked like regular high school students' hoodies, clean sneakers, a soft carry-on bag each. Invisible enough, that was the goal. Amara leaned forward, glancing across the aisle and then back at her sister. "We're blending in just fine." Celeste nodded, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. Just hope we keep it that way. A flight attendant passed by Lydia Spencer, according to her name tag. Blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, smile faded from a long day. She glanced down at the twins, then did a double take. Celeste noticed, Amara didn't. Lydia paused by the galley. She tapped something on her tablet. Her brows tightened. Celeste felt the subtle change, a breeze of tension across her skin, like static. She looked at Amara, who had returned to her music, eyes half closed. She wanted to believe it was nothing, just a glance, just tired staff, but her gut knew better. As more passengers boarded, Celeste watched Lydia out of the corner of her eye. The attendant checked tickets briskly, barely looking at some passengers, smiling at others. But when another pair of black teens walked on a brother and sister, maybe Lydia's smile cooled by several degrees. Celeste's chest tightened. It was happening again. That thing she hadn't wanted to name. That subtle, gnawing sensation that somehow you're being evaluated differently. But she swallowed it down. Maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe she was projecting. Still, just to be safe. She unzipped the front pocket of her bag and touched the travel folder she had meticulously prepared printed boarding passes, digital copies on her phone, student IDs, parental consent letter, credit card transaction history, all neat, tabbed and marked. They'd planned for everything, every scenario, every hiccup, except the one you can't predict, someone simply deciding you don't belong. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 217 with Soulless Air. We're scheduled to depart in approximately 15 minutes. Please ensure your devices are in airplane mode and larger items are stowed. Celeste closed her eyes, focused on her breathing. Slow, controlled. Beside her, Amara whispered, "We're almost there. This is going to be the best surprise ever." Celeste opened her eyes, smiled softly. Yeah, she's going to cry, like full-on ugly cry. Amara snorted. "You say that like it's a bad thing." They both chuckled, the first moment of full release since they left the house that morning. Outside the window, the sky was shifting to a watercolor dusk. Inside the cabin, the light dimmed to a calm golden hue. But just behind them, Lydia Spencer was watching and tapping and frowning. The wheels of luggage clacked against the floor as the final passengers settled into their seats. The cabin had mostly quieted babies now swaddled, conversations muted to low murmurs. The overhead bins clicked shut with finality, and the pre-flight safety video began to roll across the seat backs. Celeste tucked her phone into airplane mode and slipped it into the seat back pocket. She glanced once more at the aisle. Lydia Spencer hadn't moved for a while. She stood 3 rows ahead, head bowed slightly, tablet still in hand, stylus flicking occasionally across the screen. There was a stiffness in her stance, like something unsaid was sitting at the base of her throat. Celeste felt it before it happened. A ripple in the air, the kind that comes right before a storm. Footsteps, then a voice, polite, clipped, distant. "Excuse me, ladies," Lydia said. Celeste turned first, startled by the formality. Amara followed, tugging one earbud out. "Yes," Celeste replied. Lydia's eyes didn't blink. "I'm going to need to recheck your seat assignments." Celeste blinked. "We're in 11A and 11B. It's printed on our boarding passes." She offered the documents immediately, already halfway reaching into the seat pocket for her folder, but Lydia didn't even glance down. She kept her tone light. Too light. These seats are part of the Premium Plus tier. There seems to be some irregularity." Amara sat upright. "We booked these 3 weeks ago," she said calmly, but the edge in her voice was unmistakable. "Everything was paid for. We checked in normally." "I understand," Lydia said, though her face didn't match the words. "I just need to confirm your purchase method. These particular seats are rarely selected by students." There it was, not stated, but heard. Celeste's spine straightened. "We purchased these ourselves," she said. "Measured and even, well, with our father's card. He authorized it. We're traveling under consent. Everything is documented." Lydia gave a tight smile. "Of course. I'll just need to verify that with the purser. Please remain seated." She turned and left without waiting for a reply. Celeste watched her go, the muscles in her face locked in a practiced calm. Amara, on the other hand, leaned in close. "What was that? Did she seriously just say what I think she said?" "She didn't say it," Celeste muttered. "That's the point. Yeah, but she didn't have to." The look on her face was loud enough. A family walked past their row, oblivious. A man sneezed 2 seats over. The scent of lemon disinfectant lingered beneath the stronger smell of overhead vents pushing stale air. Celeste stared at her lap. Her fingers were tense. She hadn't wanted this trip to turn into a test, and yet here they were, only 30 minutes in and already having to defend their right to sit in the seats they had paid for. "It's fine," she whispered. "We just have to stay calm." Amara didn't answer at first. Then, softer than usual, "I want to believe that." A few minutes passed. Lydia returned. This time, she wasn't alone. A man in a navy blazer accompanied her, sleeves stiff with official patches. His silver name tag read, "Greg Tanner, Chief Flight Officer." He was taller than Lydia, but his posture bent ever so slightly toward them, the way someone leans into a confrontation without looking like they are. "Ladies," he said, tone clipped, "we're having trouble locating a matching transaction for your seat class. Can you explain how these were obtained?" Celeste already had the folder in hand. She held it out, flipping it open with methodical precision. "These are the printed boarding passes, confirmation email, the transaction from our father's card, and a signed parental consent form." Tanner didn't take the folder. He just looked at it, then at them, then back at Lydia. "Is this your first time flying alone?" he asked. "Yes," Celeste answered, "but we're not new to travel. Our family flies often." "First time without adult supervision?" Celeste nodded. Tanner's expression didn't change, but his tone cooled further. "You understand, we take travel integrity very seriously, especially for unaccompanied minors seated in premium zones." "We didn't sneak into these seats," Amara snapped, her voice sharp enough to draw glances. Celeste placed a hand gently over her sister's wrist. Tanner looked around, clearly aware that more eyes were watching now. He leaned in closer. "You're going to need to remain seated until we resolve this. If we can't verify the legitimacy of your booking, we'll need to relocate you to the back of the aircraft for the duration of the flight." Silence. Time stopped, just for a beat. Amara's mouth opened slightly, as if she were about to fire back, but Celeste spoke first. "Understood," she said quietly. "We'll wait, but we expect fairness." Tanner gave a perfunctory nod and left. Lydia lingered for a moment, her gaze softening, if only barely. Then she too disappeared toward the galley. Amara turned slowly toward her sister, her chest rising and falling with restrained fury. This is some kind of joke. Right, Celeste didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked straight ahead, where the seatback screen blinked its welcome. "We're not moving," she said at last. Imara leaned her head back against the window. "No," she whispered. "We're not." The plane had leveled off at cruising altitude, but for Celeste Monroe, there was no sense of calm. She sat motionless, hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the safety card she hadn't opened, as if memorizing its tiny diagrams could block out the lingering taste of humiliation. Next to her, Imara shifted her legs restlessly. She'd been silent for the past few minutes, her lips pressed into a line so tight it trembled. "Do you think they're going to move us?" Imara finally asked under her breath. Celeste took a moment to answer. "I don't know," she said, "but I think they want to." Just then, the curtain between the first-class galley and the forward cabin parted. Lydia Spencer stepped through again, only this time she wasn't alone. Eli Park, the onboard air marshal, moved beside her. His dark blazer, subtly stitched with a security emblem, didn't scream law enforcement, but he had the stance, calm, alert, like he'd already assessed every passenger in a single glance. Celeste's breath hitched. Are they serious? Amara's jaw dropped. They brought an air marshal Eli approached with careful measure, one hand resting just shy of his belt. "Hi there," he said, soft but firm. "Ladies, I'm Officer Park. I've been asked to assist in verifying a discrepancy with your seating assignment." "We've given every piece of documentation," Celeste said, her voice just above a whisper. "There's nothing left to verify." Lydia chimed in, standing half a step behind him. "The issue now is behavioral. Raised voices, non-compliance, possible security concern." Imara sat up straight. "You're lying." Celeste reached across instinctively, her hand on Amara's wrist again, steadying her. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't give them more to twist." Eli glanced between them, then to Lydia. "Let me speak with them privately," he said. Lydia hesitated, lips pursed, then stepped away reluctantly. He crouched slightly to meet them at eye level, his voice dropping. "Look, I know what this feels like. I've seen it before, but I have protocols. I need to ask, did you pay for these seats?" Celeste handed over the folder again, this time holding it open. He flipped through. Receipt, transaction ID, flight itinerary, parental release, even the bank's SMS confirmation. He took his time, longer than the others, actually reading. "I see," he murmured. "Nathaniel Monroe. That name should have rung bells, even for them." Amara raised a brow. "So, you've heard of him, I've met him." Eli replied quietly. "Twice. Once in Seattle. He's a man of presence." Celeste nodded. "That's our dad." Eli straightened up. "Well, I'll speak to the purser, but just know some fights aren't about proof. They're about pushing. Seeing if you'll cave." Celeste's voice cracked, but she held it steady. "We're not caving." He looked at them a moment longer, nodded once, and walked off. For a moment, silence returned. Then Imara leaned close. "I don't care how calm you act. That was messed up. They called security on us for sitting." Celeste turned to face her sister fully for the first time since takeoff. "I know," she said softly, "but if we lose our tempers, if we shout, argue, make a scene, that's what they want. That's what lets them rewrite the story." "But what if it doesn't matter?" Imara whispered. "What if the story's already written?" Celeste's reply came with a fragile breath. Then we rewrite it louder. Just then, her phone vibrated against her leg. She frowned. Hadn't she switched it to airplane mode? She fumbled it out discreetly and saw what caused it. The in-flight Wi-Fi system had just connected to a cached message from earlier. A delayed text from her father had come through. Dad, girls. I landed the funding meeting. Proud of you for making this trip on your own. Let me know when you land. Love you both. Celeste stared at the words. They felt like a thread pulling her back to ground, to meaning, a reminder. She tapped out a quick response. Celeste, everything okay? We'll call you when we land. But as she hit send, a new idea crawled into her chest. What if she didn't wait? What if this was the moment to speak? She looked to Amara, who was watching her intently now. I think we need to make the call, Celeste whispered. Amara's eyes widened. You mean now? Yes, before they escalate this again. There was hesitation in her sister's face, but not doubt, only resolve catching up to the speed of decision. Celeste clicked into the in-flight Wi-Fi calling app. Her hands didn't shake. She knew the number by heart. 3 rings, then a voice, warm and grounded, Nathaniel Monroe. Who is this, Dad? Celeste said, quiet but firm. It's me. We're on the flight. Something's happening. I need to tell you everything. Now. For Nathaniel Monroe. The sound of his daughter's voice, usually a moment of joy, landed like a cold blade across his chest. He was sitting in a leather chair in a quiet executive lounge at LAX, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the call came in. The board meeting he'd just exited had gone well. Solus Air had secured a long-sought strategic merger. His assistant was on her way to meet him with paperwork, but none of that mattered now. Celeste, he asked again, standing up abruptly. Are you safe? What's wrong? She hesitated, and that pause, too. 3 seconds was enough to tell him everything was not okay. We're safe, she said carefully, her voice low and steady, but they're trying to move us from our seats. Again. It started at the gate. It's not about seating. It feels like something else. Amara's voice chimed in faintly in the background. Tell him they brought an air marshal. For no reason. Nathaniel stiffened. What flight are you on? Flight 217, Celeste replied. We're already in the air. He didn't need to hear more. A tight fury gripped his stomach. I'm going to fix this, he said quietly. Don't say anything more to anyone. Stay calm. Don't move. Celeste let out a breath. Dad, we tried doing everything the right way. I know, sweetheart, and I'm sorry you had to. The line clicked. Nathaniel was already dialing his next number. At 37,000 feet, in the forward galley, Chief Purser Greg Tanner was listening intently as Lydia Spencer outlined her concerns. I don't like the tone they're taking, she said. I don't feel safe with them escalating. One of them gave me a look when I asked for ID. Greg, a veteran of 20 years, raised an eyebrow. A look Lydia folded her arms. There's a pattern here. Greg, I'm telling you, they're being disruptive. We've had situations escalate before. Greg knew Lydia, knew how she operated. She was meticulous, but also defensive, quick to assert control, especially when things didn't go as scripted. I'll talk to the marshal myself, he said, then paused as his headset buzzed. Incoming cockpit request. Priority. He tapped the side and listened. Greg, we have an external override, said Captain Meredith King, her voice clipped. Corporate's patching someone in directly to the cockpit. Monroe himself. Greg froze. Nathaniel Monroe. Yes, and he does not sound pleased. In the cockpit, Captain King and First Officer Devin Michaels exchanged a glance. These sorts of calls didn't happen often, and certainly not mid-air. A voice came through, cool and composed. "This is Nathaniel Monroe, CEO of Solace Air. I'm speaking to you as the legal guardian of 2 miners currently on board Celeste and Amara Monroe." Captain King straightened. "Yes, Mr. Monroe. We have them logged on the manifest. Is there a situation we should be aware of?" "There is," he said calmly, "and you're about to make it worse unless you act fast." He paused. The silence on the flight deck thickened. "My daughters were reassigned at the gate despite valid tickets. They were interrogated mid-flight. A flight attendant initiated a confrontation, called in the air marshal under false behavioral claims, and is now attempting to relocate them again." Captain King exhaled slowly. "Sir, we're still investigating. I've already reviewed the surveillance from the boarding area. Yes, I have access to it. They were calm, compliant, and targeted. This is now a liability event." Devin glanced at the warning lights. Nothing on the panel, but the real turbulence was behind them. Nathaniel's voice continued, steely but quiet. "I'm ordering you to de-escalate immediately. I will be dispatching a legal team and a press liaison to San Diego. I suggest you speak to your crew, particularly Lydia Spencer, and remind them what happens when civil rights are violated at 37,000 feet." A pause. Then he added, "Do not let this plane land in disgrace." And then the line went dead. In the main cabin, Celeste was staring at the bulkhead, her jaw clenched. "Do you think he's doing it?" Amara asked. "Like, really doing something?" Celeste shrugged. "Unsure." He sounded calm, but that's how he is when he's furious. Amara looked out the window. "I want to believe that'll matter." A moment later, the PA system pinged. The tone was different, sharper. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Meredith King speaking from the flight deck. We are currently cruising toward San Diego. Please note that seat assignments have been verified, and all passengers are to remain in their current seats for the duration of the flight." "Thank you." Celeste sat up straighter. Her heart thumped once. Hard. Imara grinned. That sounded a lot like a checkmate. Then, from the aisle, Lydia walked past, stiff and silent. No eye contact this time, her jaw set like stone. Eli Park, the air marshal, nodded once as he passed the girls, his face unreadable. But that nod, it said everything. Celeste finally let her shoulders drop. For the first time since they boarded, she allowed herself to breathe. 3,000 miles away. Nathaniel Monroe stepped out of the lounge, phone pressed to his ear. He had already instructed his legal counsel to greet the plane on landing. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. The moment Flight 217 touched down in San Diego, Celeste Monroe felt her chest tighten. The sun was casting long orange beams across the tarmac. It should have felt like any other landing. But the air in the cabin was thick, unspoken tension crackling between rows of indifferent passengers, sympathetic glances, and those who simply looked away. Celeste glanced at Imara, who was chewing on the inside of her cheek. She hadn't said much in the last 20 minutes. They'd stayed in their seats, just as the captain had advised. But the silence from the crew had been louder than any turbulence. No follow-up, no acknowledgement, just stiff avoidance. "I don't know which is worse," Amara muttered, "the way they treated us before, or the silence now." Celeste didn't respond. Her mind was racing. not just with what happened, but what was coming next. At the front of the cabin, Lydia Spencer stood with her back straight, shoulders square, as if she were preparing for a press conference. Greg Tanner approached her with caution. "Legal team's waiting at the gate," he said softly. She blinked. "Ours or theirs?" He didn't answer. Lydia took a breath, then adjusted her uniform badge, forcing a polite smile. "I'll handle it professionally." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Let's hope so." At the gate, a sleek black sedan with government plates idled beside the jet bridge. Nathaniel Monroe's legal representative, Vivian Shaw, stood outside the arrival gate. Next to her was David Quinn, Solus Air's VP of Ethics and Compliance. He looked pale, his expression tight. Vivian checked her watch. 5 minutes behind schedule. That's unlike Flight 217. Quinn tugged at his collar. "This is a mess. Do you know how many board members have already reached out?" Vivian didn't flinch. "They should, because this isn't about PR anymore. This is civil rights litigation waiting to explode. On video, on record." He rubbed his forehead. "Nathaniel's not going to let this go quietly." "Is he?" She turned to him, calm and razor sharp. "Would you, if your daughters were nearly removed from a flight under false pretenses?" The cabin doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. Celeste and Amara stood up, shouldering their backpacks. Their legs felt heavier than they should. As they moved toward the front, a passenger, an older black woman, touched Celeste's elbow. "You held yourself with grace," she whispered. "They don't expect us to stay calm, but you did, both of you." Celeste offered a small, grateful smile. Imara's eyes shimmered, but as they neared the galley, Lydia stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to offer a personal apology," Lydia said with a practiced tone. "If you felt uncomfortable during this flight, that was not our intention." Celeste tilted her head slightly. "Felt uncomfortable." Lydia blinked. "I only meant Ms. Spencer." Amara interrupted. "You tried to have us removed. You called an air marshal. You lied about us being disruptive. You made us feel like criminals." Lydia opened her mouth, but Greg touched her elbow. "Not the time," he muttered. Vivian and Quinn entered the plane just then, stepping past the crew with formal nods. "Ladies," Vivian said warmly, addressing the twins, "we've been expecting you. Come with me." She then turned to Lydia, her gaze sharper. "There will be a formal review. In the meantime, I suggest you refrain from issuing any more personal apologies, especially ones that minimize liability." Lydia flushed. Quinn cleared his throat. "I think it's best if everyone steps off the plane." Outside the jet bridge, Celeste and Amara found themselves surrounded not by cameras, not by chaos, but by quiet professionalism. Vivian shielded them as they walked, flanked on either side. Celeste's hand trembled, but Amara gripped it tightly. They descended the stairs toward the car. Standing beside it was the man whose voice had steadied their world hours earlier, Nathaniel Monroe. His dark coat fluttered in the wind as he opened his arms. No speeches, no questions, just open arms. The girls rushed into his embrace. "I'm sorry," he whispered, holding them tightly. "You should never have had to go through that." Celeste murmured against his chest. "We were just trying to be independent." "I know," he said, "and I'm proud of you for it. But even the strongest need backup. That's what family is for." Later, in a private conference room near the executive terminal, Vivian laid out the next steps. "There's video evidence from the gate. audio from the cabin, witness statements already being submitted. This isn't just a flight incident, it's systemic bias, and we're not going to let it slide. Nathaniel looked at his daughters. I don't care if the world calls this an overreaction, he said. We're shutting down Solus Air operations for 24 hours, full internal audit, and Lydia Spencer will be on leave until the investigation is complete. Amara blinked. You're grounding the airline. He nodded. No flight is more important than human dignity. Celeste looked down at her lap, then back up at her father. Do you think people will listen now? I don't know, Nathaniel said, calmly, but I know they'll have to look. Across the tarmac, inside the cockpit of another aircraft, Captain Meredith King reviewed a company-wide alert that had just come in attention all crew effective immediately. Solus Air is initiating a 24-hour system-wide standby. All flights will be held. More details to follow. First Officer Devon read it aloud. Didn't think he'd actually do it. Meredith sighed. He just did. They looked out across the taxiway as planes slowed, halted, and messages started pinging across screens like dominoes falling. History was being made in real time. For the first time in decades, Solus Air Group went silent. No roaring engines, no boarding announcements, no cheerful chimes in the cabin, just a quiet, uneasy stillness that wrapped around terminals across the country like fog. At LaGuardia, confused passengers sat slumped in chairs as gate agents offered little more than nervous shrugs. At LAX, pilots waited in lounges, flipping through flight manuals with furrowed brows, muttering, "This has never happened before." At O'Hare, an elderly man grumbled into his phone. "What do you mean the airline's grounded? Grounded for what?" And at Solus Air headquarters in San Diego, a different kind of silence had settled. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind right before a storm. In an executive meeting room on the 34th floor, Nathaniel Monroe stood before a dozen stunned department heads, his back to the panoramic view of the city. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I gave this company 30 years, he said, hands folded in front of him. And yet, my own daughters weren't safe flying under our name. Allison Brandt, head of customer relations, shifted in her seat. Mr. Monroe, if I may, this may appear like an overreaction to some shareholders. Temporarily suspending flight operations could be interpreted as integrity isn't negotiable. Nathaniel cut in, calm, direct, and anyone who thinks otherwise is welcome to resign. No one spoke. He looked around. There will be a zero-tolerance policy going forward. Racial profiling will not be brushed under training gaps, not while I'm here. In her modest apartment near downtown, Lydia Spencer sat alone at her dining table, reading the press statement for the third time. Solus Air has temporarily suspended all flight operations in response to a civil rights incident involving 2 teenage passengers on Flight 217. She felt the heat rise in her chest. They were acting defensive, she said aloud, as if someone was there to listen. They escalated. I followed protocol. But even as she said it, the words sounded thinner each time. Her phone buzzed. A message from her sister. "What's happening? You're on the news. Are you okay?" Lydia didn't reply. What could she say that she was part of something bigger than she understood? That the silence from her crew members when things spiraled should have told her she was wrong. She stared at the TV. The headline read, "Solus Air CEO's daughters allegedly profiled. Airline shuts down in historic move." Lydia lowered the volume, and for the first time in hours, listened to her own conscience. Meanwhile, Celeste and Amara sat on the rooftop garden of their father's building. The view was sprawling oceanside sunsets meeting high-rise shadows, but neither of them was looking at the skyline. Celeste toyed with a piece of rosemary from the planter. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Amara didn't answer right away. "I keep replaying it in my head," she said finally. "Our tone, our faces. Did we unintentionally give them a reason to assume the worst?" Celeste blinked. "You mean, did we seem threatening?" Amara nodded. "That's not on us," Celeste whispered. "You can do everything right and still be a target." Amara swallowed hard. "It just hurts, knowing it still happens, even to us." Celeste leaned her head on her sister's shoulder. "Especially to us." Later that night, the twins joined Nathaniel in the kitchen. He was making tea, something he always did when the weight of the day lingered long past sunset. "Chamomile or mint?" he asked. "Mint," Amara replied, sitting at the island. Celeste stayed quiet, watching him pour the water with deliberate care. He finally looked at them. "I know this wasn't the way you imagined your trip." Amara gave a half laugh. "We imagined a lot. Turns out reality had different plans." Nathaniel handed them each a mug. "I'm proud of how you handled it, but we didn't fix it," Celeste murmured. "We just exposed it." "Sometimes," he said softly, "that's the first step." He sat down across from them. "What happened wasn't your fault, but the world will always make you question that, especially when you're young, and black, and brave." Amara blinked fast. "I didn't want to call you. I thought it meant we failed." "You didn't fail," he said. "You just called back up." Celeste looked up. "What if we weren't your daughters? What if we didn't have you to call?" Nathaniel's eyes filled for the first time. "Then," he said slowly, "maybe no one would have listened. That's why I'm doing this." Across town, in a newsroom, buzzing with early drafts and updates, journalist Cara Vale scrolled through footage sent in by a passenger from Flight 217. The grainy clip showed Lydia standing rigid, gesturing toward the girls. The words weren't clear, but the emotion was. And then Celeste's calm voice. "We're not leaving. We have our tickets. We followed every rule." Cara paused, rewound, played it again. She picked up her phone. "I want this to lead tomorrow's story," she told her editor. "Not just what happened, but what it means." The editor hesitated. "It's risky. Might upset airline sponsors." Cara leaned in. "Then maybe they need to be upset." That night, headlines broke across the nation. Soulless Air CEO grounds. Entire fleet after daughters profiled on flight. Teen sisters confront. Airline bias company faces reckoning. When calm voices speak loudest. The Monroe sisters and the silence that shook the skies. The world had taken notice, and silence had finally given way to something louder, something that couldn't be ignored. By sunrise, a flurry of news vans had parked outside the Federal Transportation Oversight Committee building in Washington, D.C. What was supposed to be a routine industry quarterly meeting had rapidly transformed into a nationally televised hearing, one with all eyes on Soulless Air Group, and more specifically, on the Monroe incident. Inside the marble-lined chamber, murmurs drifted like dust motes beneath the overhead lights. Officials in Navy suits lined the dais, some flipping through briefing packets while others whispered to aides. Cameras buzzed, lenses focused, and into the room stepped Nathaniel Monroe, flanked not by attorneys or PR advisors, but by his two daughters Celeste and Amara. The hush was instant. The girls wore simple black dresses. Nathaniel, a slate gray suit, no flash, no pomp, just presence. At the front of the hearing room, Chairwoman Regina Halston adjusted her glasses and leaned toward the mic. "Mr. Monroe," she began, "we thank you for agreeing to testify today on such short notice. We also recognize the courage of your daughters, Celeste and Amara, in choosing to be here." Nathaniel gave a courteous nod. "We're honored to speak." Regina looked to the side. "Ms. Spencer from Solace Air's cabin crew is also present. She has submitted a written statement." From the back of the room, Lydia Spencer sat stiffly, lips drawn tight, eyes downward. "Before we proceed," Regina continued, "Mr. Monroe, you have the floor." Nathaniel approached the stand. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at his daughters. "My daughters did what we teach every child to do." He began. "They bought their tickets, packed carefully, arrived early, listened politely." He glanced toward Lydia, then back at the panel. "And they were stopped, questioned, accused of fraud, threatened with removal. Why? Because they were composed under pressure? Or because they were two young black girls who didn't fit someone's image of first-class passengers?" A hush settled. Nathaniel continued, "This isn't about revenge. It's about recognition of a truth we've known for too long, that professionalism can't exist where prejudice lingers." He stepped back. Celeste rose next. She looked nervous but steady. "I remember thinking," she said softly, "maybe if I smiled more, they'd believe me. Maybe if I cried less, they'd feel bad. But none of that changed anything." A pause. "Then being calm shouldn't make me suspicious. Being confident shouldn't make me a threat." Amara stood beside her. "They made us feel like imposters in our own skin." She turned to Lydia, meeting her eyes for the first time. "And you never looked at us like we were people, just problems." Lydia's lips parted, but she said nothing. Chairwoman Halston adjusted her mic. "We understand that Solace Air grounded operations in response to this event. Can you elaborate on that decision?" Nathaniel spoke clearly. "It was the only moral move. You can't continue business as usual when your brand is part of a trauma." He turned to the panel. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was a pause to reflect, to purge what's broken, and rebuild better. One of the members, an older man named Senator Clifford, asked, "But, Mr. Monroe, surely grounding an entire airline costs millions. Was it worth it?" Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. "My daughters are worth more than any bottom line." Back row. Lydia shifted uncomfortably. She hadn't planned to be here in person, but her union had advised it. Better to face it directly. They'd said, but now, as Celeste and Amara spoke with clarity, as Nathaniel dismantled every veiled excuse the company had once made, Lydia felt something else. Not anger, not fear, but a slow, gnawing shame. She looked down at her own written statement again. "I acted in good faith, based on discrepancies and suspicious behavior." Her words were hollow now, cold, mechanical. She had followed the manual, but she hadn't followed her instincts, or worse, she had, and they had failed her. She exhaled, and something cracked inside her. By midday, the hearing was trending across every platform. Monroe sisters deliver powerful testimony. Nathaniel Monroe, integrity over profits. We Fly with Celeste trended on X. Charlotte Mara speaks. Truth exploded on TikTok. But beyond the screens, in homes and hearts, the real story was unfolding. Parents of color hugged their children tighter. Teachers revised lesson plans to include the girls' words. Flight crew members across the nation began texting each other, "What would I have done?" Even on Solis Air's employee message board, anonymous posts began pouring in. I've seen similar things happen. We need change. Watching the hearing. I cried. We failed them. I want to be part of fixing this. That night, back in their hotel room, Celeste stared at the city lights through the window. I wasn't ready for how public this got. She said. Imara sat cross-legged on the bed, flipping channels. Me either. But maybe it had to be loud, for people to hear it. Celeste frowned. Do you think they'll actually change anything? Imara turned the volume down and looked at her sister. They already did. In his own suite down the hall, Nathaniel stared at an email draft for the Solis Air Board effective immediately. I will appoint a chief inclusion officer to the executive team. All flight and ground staff will undergo equity-based recertification, and all employees will be empowered to challenge bias without fear of retaliation. He paused before typing the last line. This isn't the end. It's the takeoff. He clicked send and exhaled. Tomorrow would bring headlines, newscasts, arguments, opinions. But for tonight, 3 people sat quietly. Father, daughters united not just by blood, but by belief that truth, no matter how delayed, always demands to land. The following day, the nation buzzed with a strange combination of outrage and admiration. Outrage at how 2 teenage girls had been publicly humiliated for trying to board a flight they had every right to take. Admiration at the poise with which they handled it. But amidst the storm of statements, interviews, hashtags, and headlines, there was one thing no one heard: an apology, not from the flight crew, not from the airline executive board, not from Lydia Spencer, the flight attendant who had been the catalyst of it all. And to Celeste Monroe, that silence was louder than any insult. Back at the hotel, as their departure from D.C. neared, Celeste sat on the edge of her bed, a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, untouched. She glanced at her phone. No texts from unknown numbers, no apology messages, just a flood of supportive posts and media interview requests. Imara walked out of the bathroom in her hoodie, drying her hair with a towel. Did she say anything? Imara asked, not needing to clarify who she was. Celeste shook her head. Nothing. Imara frowned. She looked right at us at the hearing. You'd think she'd at least say something. Celeste's fingers tightened around the cup. Maybe she didn't think we deserved it, she said softly. That same night, across the city, Lydia Spencer sat in her small kitchen. Her husband had taken their kids to his sister's for the weekend at her suggestion. She needed space to think. On the table was her open laptop, the Solis Air employee portal blinking softly in the dim light. A new policy bulletin had arrived. All cabin crew must attend a 12-week bias and inclusion certification program, beginning next month. She stared at the screen. She had never considered herself racist, prejudiced, biased. She had grown up in a multicultural neighborhood in Queens. Her godson was biracial. She donated to causes. She checked all the boxes. So, why did the faces of Celeste and Imara Monroe keep flashing through her mind? Why did their calmness feel so unsettling? She opened a new email window. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then, slowly, she typed, "Subject to the Monroe family," I wanted to say. She paused, deleted it, typed again. "I'm sorry for what happened on that flight. It was never my intention to make you feel delete." She stared at the blinking cursor and closed the laptop. She couldn't find the words. Maybe she didn't have the courage. Maybe it was pride. Maybe she was afraid the apology wouldn't be enough, or worse, would be too late. The next day, Nathaniel Monroe stood with his daughters outside the Soulless Air hangar, where a new mural was being unveiled, a life-sized painting of two black girls standing tall in front of a boarding ramp. Below them, a quote, "You don't have to shout to be heard, but you do have to speak." As cameras flashed and reporters gathered, Celeste stepped forward for a short speech. "I didn't expect any of this," she began. "And honestly, I didn't want to become a symbol. I just wanted to fly home." The crowd chuckled softly. "But sometimes, what happens to you becomes bigger than you." She paused, "And even if you never get an apology, you can still rise." Behind her, Amara gave a small, proud smile. That night, Celeste lay awake long after Amara had fallen asleep. She thought about the flight, the disbelief in the crew's eyes, the feeling of being doubted for simply existing. She thought about Lydia Spencer. Would an apology have changed anything? Yes, she thought, maybe not the facts, but maybe the wound wouldn't feel so wide. She turned toward the window, watching the stars flicker over the city. There were some things you could forgive, some things you had to. But forgetting, that was different. Elsewhere, in a quiet lounge at the Soulless Air headquarters, Lydia Spencer sat alone, flipping through a printed copy of the Monroe girls' testimonies. Their words were raw, clear, graceful, and they weren't bitter. That was what struck her most. They didn't curse her, didn't demand vengeance. They simply told the truth. And Lydia, for the first time, felt the weight of what silence can cost. She stood, walked to the nearest computer, logged into the internal messaging system. To the entire Soulless team, and to the passengers I failed, I owe you more than words. But I want to start with them. I was wrong. I should have listened. I should have looked again. I see now what I refused to see then. I am sorry. I will do better. She clicked send. For now, it would have to be enough. Meanwhile, the Monroe family finally boarded a private Soulless Air jet to return home to California. As the engines roared to life, Celeste sat by the window, watching the tarmac slip away beneath them. "Do you think people will remember this?" she asked. Nathaniel looked at her. "They'll remember the silence," he said, "and the ones who chose to break it." And as the aircraft lifted into the soft, violet sky, the world below hummed with the echo of a story still unfolding, not with vengeance, but with vision, not with bitterness, but with bravery, not with rage, but with rebuilding. The sun was just beginning to rise over the San Francisco International Airport, casting streaks of amber light across the tarmac. The same gates that once stood as symbols of exclusion for the Monroe twins now gleamed with a quiet promise change. Celeste stood just outside Gate C-19 where a familiar silver and gold aircraft waited. The placard read, "Soulless Air Flight 217 San Francisco to Washington. D.C. Yes, that Flight 217. Amara zipped up her hoodie and looked at her sister, a crooked smile on her face. "Back where it all started," she said. Celeste nodded, the corners of her lips twitching upward, but her eyes remained distant, focused. This wasn't just a flight, this was a return, a reckoning, a symbol of who they had become and what they would no longer tolerate. When they boarded, the cabin felt familiar and not. The interior had been redesigned, warmer lighting, more inclusive messaging on the screens. Even the safety card featured a variety of skin tones and visible diversities. There was no Lydia Spencer, no Greg Tanner, no whispering glances. Instead, a new purser, Janelle Harmon, greeted them with a genuine smile. Miss Monroe, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you." Her tone was soft, without performative sweetness. It was simple respect. Celeste and Amara took their seats in 2A and 2B, the same row they had once been denied. But something felt different now, not just on the outside, but within them, stronger, calmer, clearer. As boarding continued, Celeste found herself caught in a swirl of memories, the shouted demands, the security officers, the disbelief in their eyes. It all replayed in her mind like a loop she couldn't silence. She reached into her backpack and pulled out the small black journal she kept tucked away. Inside were pages filled with scribbles, quotes, and one powerful line circled twice. "Your presence is not the problem. Their perception is—" Amara leaned over. "You thinking what I'm thinking." Celeste raised a brow. Amara grinned. "That we should reclaim this flight. For us." Celeste smiled, but she couldn't shake the feeling that not everyone had turned the page. Meanwhile, in the airline's operations hub, a quiet but significant shift was underway. Nathaniel Monroe, now sitting on the airline's Executive Inclusion Council, not as a favor, but as a strategic force, reviewed a new real-time passenger experience tracker. Red flags from the old days. They would be caught immediately now. Bias patterns, passenger profiling, even interaction tone scoring analyzed through AI and human review. But Nathaniel knew better than to rely solely on systems. He also knew what couldn't be programmed human empathy, which is why he had personally signed off on training every Soulless Air employee with a module he helped design Dignity in the Skies. Because to him, his daughters were never just passengers. They were the measure. Back on the flight, a middle-aged white couple took seats across from the twins. The woman glanced at Celeste, then quickly looked away. Amara noticed. Here it comes again. But this time, the woman cleared her throat. I just wanted to say, I saw the video, what happened, and I'm sorry, that never should have happened to you two." Amara blinked, surprised. Celeste gave a small, sincere nod. "Thank you. That means a lot." The woman exhaled, visibly relieved. "My niece is your age. She couldn't stop talking about how brave you both were." Amara chuckled. "Brave's a nice way of saying we almost passed out from the nerves." The woman laughed too. The tension dissolved. Celeste leaned back in her seat, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Small moments. That's where healing starts. As Flight 2117 cruised at 36,000 feet, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Soulless Air. As we make our way eastbound this morning, we'd like to take a moment to recognize that today marks exactly 6 weeks since our airline began a transformation. That transformation began right here on Flight 217, and it continues with each and every one of you." The cabin clapped softly. Celeste's eyes shimmered. She wasn't the type to cry, but something about being seen, really seen, hit her in the chest. Amara reached over and squeezed her hand. "You okay?" Celeste nodded. Yeah, I think I actually am. But just as peace settled in, a sharp sound rang out. Ding! A male passenger in the middle section began raising his voice. Loud, aggressive. I don't care what your protocol is. I paid for that seat, and I don't want to sit next to her. The cabin fell silent. Celeste's stomach dropped. Here we go again, she thought. Janelle, the purser, moved swiftly and calmly. Sir, she said firmly but professionally, if you cannot sit respectfully next to other passengers, we will be forced to deplane you at the next stop. I'm not racist, the man snapped. She smells like curry or something. It's disgusting. He was pointing at a South Asian woman, nervous, shrinking into her seat. Amara stood up without thinking. Sir, that's not okay. Celeste followed, her voice calm. You're free to have preferences, but not at the expense of someone else's dignity. The man stood too. Who even are you? Amara folded her arms. The girls who shut this airline down the last time someone acted like you. The cabin gasped. A few people clapped. The man paused. His bravado faltered. Within minutes, Air Marshal Eli Park, who had been seated nearby, approached. Sir, you're going to need to take your seat or leave this aircraft. Your behavior is violating FAA regulations. The man grumbled but sat down. The South Asian woman looked at Celeste and whispered, Thank you. Celeste smiled gently. You don't have to thank us. You belong here. And, as she sat back down, something inside her settled, solidified. They weren't passengers anymore. They were protectors of the sky. The lights dimmed in the cabin of Flight 217 as it began its descent toward Washington, D.C. The quiet hum of the engines became a backdrop to a moment that neither Celeste nor Amara Monroe would soon forget. There was a stillness in the air, one that only came when something long overdue had finally begun to settle. Celeste stared out the window, watching clouds roll past. She wasn't thinking about social media posts or press statements, not even her father's reforms. She was thinking about how it felt to stand up not just for herself but for someone else. Someone who didn't have a voice loud enough in that moment. The South Asian woman they had defended earlier had fallen asleep. Her posture no longer curled inward with shame. Amara tapped her pen against the seat's armrest and whispered, Do you think we've actually changed anything? Celeste turned from the window, voice low. We didn't change the sky, but maybe we taught it to listen. In Washington, a different kind of storm was brewing. The House Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight had called an emergency hearing largely symbolic, but politically charged. A few senators wanted to grandstand on the topic of social justice overreach in corporate spaces, particularly in aviation. But Senator Clifford Ashford, a veteran lawmaker and rare voice of reason, requested a different kind of witness. He asked to hear from the passengers, specifically from two teenage girls. The next morning, Celeste and Amara sat in a side chamber of the Capitol. Aides bustled around, camera crews readied their gear, and a familiar face entered with a folder of neatly arranged notes. Vivian Shaw, counsel for Soulless Air. She introduced herself again, though they knew her well by now. You'll be speaking second. After your father opens, she explained, then it's all yours. Just speak from the heart. Amara raised a brow. That's what everyone says right before they want you to keep your mouth shut. Vivian chuckled. Not this time. Celeste clutched her notes. She didn't want to rehearse a speech. She wanted to tell the truth, but without anger clouding her clarity. She looked at Imara. "We're not here for revenge." "No," Imara said, leaning closer. "We're here to remind them that dignity isn't negotiable." When their father took the mic, the room quieted. Nathaniel Monroe looked calm, in his usual charcoal suit, but his voice carried weight like thunder under silk. "I shut down my company's flight operations that day, not out of anger, but out of necessity," he began, "because I realized, in that moment, we had forgotten what we were flying for." He paused. "My daughters weren't denied boarding because of a ticketing error. They were denied because their presence didn't fit someone else's assumption of who belongs in first class." Murmurs rippled across the chamber. This was not a rogue employee. It was a culture we allowed to grow, and we will change it not with slogans, but with systems. When he stepped away, Celeste could feel every eye shift toward them. Time to rise. Celeste approached the microphone first, heart pounding so loudly she wondered if the mic could pick it up. "I didn't grow up thinking I'd have to prove I deserved a seat I paid for," she began. "But then I was told indirectly and directly that being black, being young, and being female made me suspicious by default." She steadied her breath. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm aware that silence is too often mistaken for agreement, and I will not be silent anymore." Imara stepped forward next, her voice strong and unapologetic. "You think teenagers don't notice the small things? The glances, the extra questions, the way the flight crew's tone changed when we said our last name." She paused. "But we noticed. And so did millions of other kids who saw that video and felt seen for the first time." There was silence, then a single clap, then another, then the chamber erupted into applause not political, but personal. Later, as they walked down the Capitol steps, Imara nudged Celeste. "Think that did anything?" Celeste smiled softly. "I think the sky's still listening." And behind them, a message appeared on a jumbotron outside the terminal of Reagan National Airport, Solis Air. "Welcomes everyone, no exceptions, no excuses." For the first time since it all began, the message felt earned, and not just for them, but for every soul who had ever been made to feel less than 30,000 feet in the air. By the time the Monroe family returned to California, the media frenzy had shifted from the peak of outrage to the subtle hum of commentary. Think pieces, panel debates, and hashtags that came and went with each new headline. But for Celeste and Imara Monroe, the aftermath wasn't noise. It was silence, the kind that hangs in the air when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the weight of what happened. Because while the hearings were over, the press conferences concluded, and their father had been praised for his decisive leadership, there were still questions, still scars, and still a quiet ache neither sister quite knew how to name. The evening after their return, Celeste sat alone on the back porch, the soft California dusk washing over her in warm blues and golds. She had her notebook open, but the pages remained blank. She wasn't sure what to write, or if she even wanted to. Her thoughts, usually crisp and intentional, had turned cloudy, fuzzy, the kind of emotional fog that came not from trauma but from trying too hard to stay composed for everyone else. She had been the calm one, the strong one, the voice of reason, but now she just felt tired. Behind her, the screen door creaked. "You okay?" Imara asked, stepping out with a glass of lemonade. Celeste didn't answer right away. Then, "Do you ever feel like we're supposed to be grateful for having to teach people not to mistreat us?" Amara sat beside her, silent for a moment. All the time. Inside, Nathaniel Monroe stood in his study, facing the shelves that held awards, degrees, and signed photographs with industry leaders. The symbols of success, of acceptance, but tonight they felt like masks. He had built Solus Air from the ground up, had made it a beacon of innovation and customer loyalty. He had truly believed it was a company that did better. But his daughters had been failed, and that wasn't just a corporate misstep. That was personal. His phone vibrated. A message from Vivian Shaw. Senator Ashford's office called. The Department of Transportation is recommending an equity framework be modeled on Solus Air's reforms. They want your input. He should have felt proud. Instead, he felt the gnawing grip of guilt. He had been too late. Later that night, Celeste walked past the living room and paused. Imara was asleep on the couch, an old movie playing softly. Their father sat nearby, shoulders slumped, head in his hands. Celeste hesitated, then stepped in. Dad. He looked up quickly, eyes rimmed with fatigue. She sat beside him. I saw the photos from the terminal mural, he said softly. You look so composed. Celeste folded her arms across her chest. I didn't feel composed. You didn't have to be, he said. You shouldn't have had to be. He turned to her fully now, voice hoarse. I'm sorry, Celeste, for not shielding you from that moment, for building a company that looked right on paper but forgot to ask the right questions in practice. Celeste's eyes glistened. I don't need you to protect me from the world, she said gently. I need you to believe me when I tell you what it looks like from where I stand. Nathaniel nodded. I'm listening now. Amara joined them minutes later, barefoot, hair tousled from sleep. She plopped on the floor, leaned her head against their father's leg. I still think we should have shut down the whole airline, she mumbled. Nathaniel laughed through a choked throat. We nearly did. Amara smirked. Good. They sat there a long time, the three of them, cocooned in the hush of a home still learning how to breathe again after the storm. And though none of them said it out loud, they all knew the turbulence didn't end when the plane landed. It stayed with you, in your chest, in your voice, in your silence. But maybe, just maybe, you learned how to fly through it. 6 months later, Solus Air Flight 217 was once again preparing for takeoff, this time with a quiet reverence. The airline's new safety video played not with corporate gloss, but with genuine storytelling. It opened with a panoramic view of an airstrip at dawn, the voiceover slow and warm. We don't just fly from place to place. We carry people's stories, histories, hopes. Every seat has a soul. In the cabin, a young girl stared out the window, headphones snug over her ears. Across the aisle, her father, a man in uniform, nodded to a passing flight attendant with a small smile. This wasn't just another trip, it was a new chapter. At Solus Air headquarters, framed sketches of Flight 217's cabin redesign hung on the wall. Beside them, a large black-and-white photo Celeste and Imara Monroe, arms crossed, standing beneath a banner that read, Equality is not extra service. It's the baseline. The caption beneath the image was Simple Legacy in Motion. In her new office, Celeste Monroe, now a youth inclusion advisor to Solus Air, adjusted the pin on her blazer. She still didn't like the title, but she liked the work. She looked at the agenda on her desk. New employee onboarding reforms, cultural bias training audit, interview with Aviation Youth Weekly, panel with Senator Ashford on inclusive travel. It was a lot, but it mattered. Across town, Amara Monroe walked into a local high school's auditorium with her backpack slung low. She wasn't in politics or business. She was in classrooms talking to kids who looked like her. She flipped through slides showing what happened that day on Flight 217. "How many of you think it couldn't happen to you?" she asked. Several hands rose. Amara nodded. "That's what I thought, too." Meanwhile, in a quiet cafe near the Capitol, Nathaniel Monroe met with Senator Clifford Ashford and a few airline CEOs. The Department of Transportation had rolled out a national certification program, one rooted in Soulless Air's transformation. They called it the Wings of Equity Initiative. "Funny," Ashford said, sipping his coffee. "You grounded your fleet to make a point. And now, we're building new runways from it." Nathaniel smiled. "It wasn't about making a point," he said. "It was about making sure my daughters could fly without fear." Later that night, the Monroe family gathered at home. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't scripted. Just takeout containers on the kitchen counter, slippers kicked off in the hallway, and jazz humming low from the speaker. Celeste sat at the table with her journal open. Amara leaned against the fridge, sipping a soda. Nathaniel joined them with a tired sigh. "Guess who the FAA just invited to speak next month? The girl who tweeted our video with 'Drag them, Queens,' Amara offered." "Close," he chuckled. "You?" Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Me. They want a passenger's perspective at the summit." Celeste exhaled. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "You don't need to be," Nathaniel replied. "You just need to be honest." Celeste nodded. She was tired, yes, but also more rooted than she'd ever felt. Because change wasn't a firework. It was a slow, steady burn. And somehow, they'd kept it going. The next morning, Celeste boarded a routine soulless flight, not as a protest, not for a headline, just as a girl returning to college. She passed a gate agent who smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Monroe." Not a trace of doubt in her tone. No pause, no second glance, just welcome. Celeste walked the jet bridge slowly, savoring it. Inside the cabin, the crew greeted her warmly. Passengers of every shade, shape, and size settled into their seats. The air was calm, and the sky outside stretched wide, open, and unjudging. Celeste sat by the window, closed her eyes, and whispered, more to herself than anyone, "This is what it should have always felt like." And finally, it did. What started as a humiliating moment for two young black girls became a powerful reckoning, one that forced an entire airline, and then a nation, to ask, what are we really willing to stand for? Celeste and Amara Monroe didn't yell. They didn't fight back with rage. They responded with presence, with poise, and with the kind of dignity that can't be denied. Their story reminded us that discrimination doesn't always scream sometimes. It whispers through a gate agent's voice, a sideways glance, or a quietly denied seat. But thanks to their courage, those whispers became a roar. This isn't just about first class or flight policies. It's about who we see as worthy. It's about every child who's ever been made to feel invisible, and every parent who won't let that happen again. As you leave this story, ask yourself, who gets to take up space in your world? Who do we make room for? And if you feel moved, share this story, because every view, every share, every voice helps rewrite the rules of the sky. Drop your thoughts in the comments, like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story that might just change everything. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay grounded in truth and always fly with love.